The call came at 6:47 inches the morning, and I almost didn't answer it because I didn't recognize the number. I was still in my scrubs from a 12-hour night shift at the hospital, sitting in my car in the parking garage, too tired to drive home and too wired to sleep. I had a half-eaten granola bar in my lap and a cold coffee in the cup holder. I stared at the screen for 3 rings, then picked up. It was my grandmother's attorney. He told me that my grandmother had passed quietly the evening before, in her home, with her caregiver present. He told me she had not suffered. He told me he was sorry for my loss. And then, after a brief pause, he told me that there appeared to be some irregularities with the estate documents on file, and that he would need me to come in at my earliest convenience to sort through them. I didn't understand what that meant yet. I thanked him, hung up, and sat in that parking garage for a long time crying, because my grandmother had been the one person in my family who had always made me feel like I wasn't too much, like I was exactly enough. I found out what irregularities meant 3 days later. But first, I have to tell you what my family did in those 3 days, because that is the part that changed everything. My grandmother raised my mother in a small house in Dayton, Ohio. When my grandfather passed 15 years ago, my grandmother stayed in that house alone, and for the last 4 years of her life, as her mobility declined and her memory started to slip, I was the one who drove down on weekends to check on her. I was the one who coordinated with her doctor, who managed her prescriptions, who sat with her on the porch, and listened to her talk about my grandfather for hours, even though I had heard every story 100 times. I was the one who set up automatic transfers from my own account every month, $200, sometimes more when her heating bills were high because her Social Security didn't stretch the way it used to, and I didn't want her going without. My mother knew I did this. My sister knew I did this. Nobody helped. My sister had married well, as my mother always put it. My brother-in-law worked in commercial real estate, and they lived in a large house in a suburb of Columbus. They drove the right cars. They were at every family gathering with a bottle of wine and a story about their upcoming vacation. My sister was 3 years older than me, and from the time we were children, she had been my mother's favorite in the way that some families have favorites and pretend they don't. I was the responsible one. I was the one who called on birthdays. I was the one who showed up. My sister was the one who got celebrated for showing up occasionally with flowers. None of that bothered me the way it probably should have. I had made peace with it. I was 31 years old. I had a job I cared about. I had my own apartment. I had my grandmother. That was enough. But then my grandmother passed, and within 48 hours of her death, my sister posted in our family's private Facebook group. I was at work when it went up. A coworker, who is also a family friend, texted me a screenshot because she wasn't sure I had seen it. I pulled it up in the break room. My sister had written a long post. She expressed grief about our grandmother in the first 2 sentences. By the 3rd sentence, she had pivoted. She wrote that it had come to her attention that certain financial irregularities had been discovered in our grandmother's accounts in the months before her passing. She wrote that a significant amount of money, she said tens of thousands of dollars, had been redirected without authorization. She wrote that she and my mother had been working with the attorney to understand what had happened, and that they had reason to believe that someone with direct access to our grandmother's finances had been taking advantage of a vulnerable elderly woman. She did not name me. She didn't have to. There were 14 people in that group, and every single one of them knew that I was the one who had access to my grandmother's accounts. I was the one who paid her bills. I was the one who drove down every weekend. I was the only one who had ever had any involvement in her day-to-day finances, because I was the only one who had shown up to help manage them. By the time I got home from my shift, my phone had 7 missed calls. 2 from aunts, 1 from a cousin, 1 from my mother, which I did not return, and 1 from my grandmother's attorney, which I called back immediately. He told me to come in the next morning. He said it calmly, but with a weight in his voice that I had not heard in our first conversation. I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, and I went through every piece of documentation I had ever kept related to my grandmother's finances. I had kept everything. I am a person who keeps things. Bank statements, transfer receipts. The notebook I used when I sat with her and we'd go through her monthly expenses together. Text messages where she'd thank me for handling something. Emails I had sent her doctor. The log I kept of her medications, updated weekly. I had 4 years of records in a series of folders on my laptop, backed up in 2 places, because I had always known, in a quiet and careful part of my mind, that this was the kind of situation where documentation mattered. I had never said that out loud to anyone. I had just kept the records. I printed what I needed. I put it all in an accordion folder. I drove to the attorney's office the next morning, and I sat across from a man named Gerald, who had handled my grandmother's affairs for 12 years. And I listened to him explain what had happened. My grandmother had updated her will 8 months ago. Gerald had received the new documents by courier. The documents bore her signature and a notary stamp. In the updated version, I had been removed as co-executor of the estate. The house, which had been designated to pass equally between my mother, my sister, and me, was now designated to pass solely to my mother and my sister. A handwritten amendment stated that I had been excluded due to financial misconduct involving estate assets. I sat with that for a moment. Misconduct. The word sat in the room like something physical. I asked Gerald if he had spoken with my grandmother directly about this update. He said the documents had come by courier, not through a meeting. He said he had found that unusual at the time, but the signature had appeared valid, and the notary credentials had checked out on their face. He said that in light of what my mother and sister were now alleging, he had submitted the documents for forensic review. I asked him what that meant. He said he had reason to believe the signature might not be authentic. I opened my accordion folder. I laid 8 months of bank statements on his desk, showing every transfer I had made into my grandmother's account, with corresponding records from my own account showing the withdrawals. I showed him the text messages from my grandmother thanking me. I showed him the log of every bill I had paid on her behalf. I showed him receipts for a wheelchair ramp I had arranged and paid for myself 9 months ago. Gerald looked at everything very carefully. He picked up each page and read it. When he was done, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me that the forensic review had already returned preliminary results. The signature on the amended will was not consistent with my grandmother's signature samples on file. The notary stamp was registered to a business in Columbus. The business address corresponded to a suite in a commercial real estate office building. My brother-in-law's office building. I am going to be honest with you. There was a moment, sitting in that chair, where I felt something close to relief, not because of what it meant for the estate, but because it confirmed what I had felt in my body since I had read my sister's Facebook post that the story I was being accused of was not mine. The story I was being accused of was someone else's, and now there was a paper trail pointing in a very specific direction. I did not say that to Gerald. I said very little. I asked him what the process was from here. He explained. I took notes. I shook his hand. I picked up my folder, and I walked out to my car. I sat in the car for a few minutes. Then I drove to a copy shop and made 2 full sets of duplicates of everything I had, and I stored them in separate locations. The next 3 weeks were not quiet. My mother called several more times. I did not answer. My sister sent a long text message expressing concern for my mental health and suggesting that I speak to someone, which I found remarkable given the circumstances. An aunt on my mother's side left a voicemail telling me that family is family and that these things should be handled privately, and that whatever I had done, I should come forward and apologize so that the healing could begin. I did not respond to any of it. What I did was this. I called a probate attorney. I filed a formal dispute with the estate. I provided my documentation to the forensic examiner working with Gerald. And I waited. I want to tell you about one specific conversation because I think it is important. About 10 days after the attorney meeting, my mother came to my apartment unannounced. I was home. I watched through the peephole for a moment before I opened the door, which I am not sure I would have done if I had thought about it longer. She looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing the gray cardigan she always wore to what she considered serious occasions. She came inside without being invited, which is something my mother has always done. She sat on my couch and she told me that she was not angry with me, that she just wanted to understand. She said that my grandmother had clearly become confused in her final months, and that maybe the lines between helping and taking had become unclear to me. She said she didn't think I was a bad person. She said she thought I had made some poor decisions under pressure, and that the best thing now was to acknowledge them so the family could move forward. I let her finish. I sat across from her in the armchair, and I let her say the entire thing without interrupting. Then I asked her one question. I asked whether she was aware that the notary stamp on the amended will was registered to an address in my brother-in-law's building. My mother's face did something complicated. It was not surprise. Exactly. It was something closer to a person realizing that the story they had prepared for is no longer the story that is happening. She said she didn't know what I was talking about. I told her that I believed her, and I told her that the forensic examiner and the probate court would be determining what had happened, and that I was cooperating fully with both, and that she was welcome to do the same. She left about 4 minutes later, without saying much else. 2 days after that, the Facebook post disappeared. No explanation, no retraction, just gone. But 14 people had seen it. Several of them had commented on it. The story had spread the way stories spread in families, which is to say it had reached people I had not spoken to in years, and several of them now believed that I had stolen from my dying grandmother. That part was harder than the legal process, if I am honest. I am a nurse. I work in a community where reputation matters. I had 2 coworkers ask me carefully worded questions in the weeks that followed. I had a family friend stop returning my calls. I had a cousin who had been close to me since childhood send me a single text saying she needed some space to process everything she had heard. I processed that alone. I did not defend myself publicly. I did not post anything. I did not reach out to people to explain my side. I kept going to work. I kept doing my job. I kept my documentation organized, and I communicated only with my attorney. I want to tell you something I learned in those weeks. There is a version of yourself that you find when everything is stripped away, and the people who should defend you don't. It is quieter than the version of you that exists in relationship to other people. It is also more certain. I learned that my certainty about who I was did not actually depend on other people confirming it. I had always thought it did. Those weeks showed me otherwise. The forensic examination concluded in full 5 weeks after my grandmother's passing. The results were unambiguous. The signature on the amended will was a forgery. The notary credentials belonged to an entity that had been dissolved 2 years prior, whose registered agent had been an LLC connected to my brother-in-law. A subsequent review of my grandmother's bank account, ordered by the probate court, revealed 14 transfers over the previous 11 months, totaling just under $22,000, moving from her account to a second account that had been opened in her name but with a different mailing address. The address was a P.O. box registered to my brother-in-law. My sister called me the evening before this became official. I know now that she had been told by their attorney what the review had found. I answered this time. She cried. I will say that. She cried for a long time, and she said she hadn't known the full extent of what my brother-in-law had done, that she had thought it was more limited, that she had thought it would never be discovered, and then in the same breath she said she was sorry. She said it multiple times. I listened. I was not cold. But I said what was true, which was that the part I was struggling with was not the forgery that was my brother-in-law's doing, and the courts would handle it. The part I was struggling with was the Facebook post. That was her voice. That was her choice. She had not suspected me on accident. She had written those words deliberately, posted them where our family would see them, and let the implications sit for weeks, while I went to work and fielded questions and lost a friendship and watched a cousin I loved pull away from me. She didn't have an answer for that part. I told her I needed time. I ended the call. Here is what happened after. My brother-in-law was referred for criminal prosecution. The forged will was voided by the probate court. The original will was reinstated, which meant I was restored as co-executor, and the house passed as my grandmother had originally intended. The $22,000 is being recovered through the estate dispute process, which will take time, but the mechanism is in place. My mother called me after the ruling. She apologized. I want to give her credit for that, because she is not a person who apologizes easily. She said she should have asked questions before she believed what she was told. She said she should have called me. She said she knew, somewhere, that I would not have done what I was accused of, and that she had let herself be convinced because it was easier than believing it could be her son-in-law. I accepted the apology. I am still working on what it means for our relationship going forward. Those are two different things, and I think people sometimes confuse them. My sister sent a retraction to the family group. Not a long one, not elaborate, but she named me directly and said that the accusations had been wrong and that I had done nothing inappropriate. She sent it without being asked to. That mattered to me. The cousin who had pulled away texted me. The coworkers stopped asking questions. Things did not go back to exactly where they were, because they never do, but the shape of my life is my own again. I want to say one more thing before I close, because I have been thinking about it throughout this whole process, and I think it is the most honest thing I can offer. My grandmother knew what she was doing when she put me in her will as co-executor. She knew me. She knew that I would show up on weekends and manage her prescriptions, and sit on the porch and listen to the grandfather stories. She knew I kept records. I think in the way that elderly people who have lived a long time sometimes know more than they say, she might have known that I would need those records someday. I kept them because I respected her, not because I was protecting myself. But I am grateful that the two things turned out to be the same. The grandmother's ring, a small sapphire set in white gold that she had worn since her engagement in 1959, had been included in a personal property list in the original will with my name beside it. It is on my hand as I tell you this. The restored will confirmed it. My sister did not contest it. I wore it on my last trip to Dayton, when I went back to the house to begin the executor process, and I sat on the porch for a while by myself, in the cold, looking at the yard, and I thought about what it means to love someone without needing them to defend you publicly, to prove it. My grandmother never defended me out loud. She never had to. She left me her ring. She put my name in the will. She saved every card I had ever sent her in a shoebox in her closet, and when I found it during the executor walkthrough, I sat on the floor of her bedroom for 20 minutes and didn't move. That was enough. It was always enough. The truth does not require your help to exist. It only requires that you not cover it up. I did not cover it up. I kept my records, and I waited, and I let the process work. I did not fight loudly. I did not post anything. I did not call people to explain myself. I just showed up with the folder and told the truth to the people who were in a position to act on it. And then, 62 days after my grandmother passed, my phone rang 11 times in 1 hour ants. Cousins, my mother's friends, people I hadn't heard from in years, and the only thing they all wanted to say was some version of, "We were wrong about you. We are sorry. We should have asked." I answered every call. I was gracious. I said what I meant, and I meant what I said. That is the part they never see coming. Not the records, not the court ruling, not the forensic examiner. The part they never see coming is that you already know who you are, and you have known all along, and the process of being publicly accused and publicly exonerated does not change you in either direction. It only clarifies what was already true. I am 31 years old. I work night shifts. I drive to Dayton sometimes on my days off, and sit in a house that is quieter than it used to be. I wear my grandmother's ring. I keep my files organized. And I have learned that the quietest people in the room are usually the ones who already know how the story ends. What time is it where you are right now? And has anyone in your family ever asked you to stay quiet when you should have spoken up? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, tap the like button and stay with me, because the next one is already waiting.